waiting for us to go. I think we're live now. All right. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're reaching us from. My name is Segun Adeyemi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Anchor, and I would be your host for today. Today, our topic is how to scale a startup. As we all know, launching is one thing, but scaling is a whole different ball game. And today we've brought two industry leaders who all know about scaling because they've done it in different markets and across different products and at different stages. First of all, I'd like to introduce Mark. Mark Straub is the CEO of Smile Identity, a company that has been scaling quickly across Africa, helping businesses with identity verification, fraud detection, KYC compliance, and many more. Welcome, Mark. It's good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Segun, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to speaking with you and hopefully sharing what I can with your audience.
Awesome. Thank you. Also, we have Ayo Akindele, the CEO of Kyshi, a fintech company that is simplifying cross-border payments for businesses, especially those who are looking to expand into different African markets. Thank you for joining us, Ayo.
Thank you, Segun. Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation. And yeah, I'm looking forward to a wholesome conversation. Yeah, glad to be here.
All right. We are going to jump right straight into it. I would start by giving you guys maybe a bit more time to introduce yourself more and talk more about what your company do while more people join us. And then once we are done with like more deep introductions, we can then go into like the questions that we've prepared. Hopefully we get a chance to also have some audience questions. We have only 1 hour, so we have to be, we have to try to maximize the time we have. So yeah, I'll start with you, Mark. So, just very quickly tell us a little bit about Smile ID and about yourself.
Sure. So at Smile ID, we try to make it easy for people to prove their identity regardless of the origin of their ID card or their IP address. What this means practically is we provide software solutions like APIs, SDKs, and automated workflows that allow companies to verify the true identity of a user, of a consumer mostly, as they are onboarding into an application, often a bank application, sometimes a lending or financial services or payment application. We do this across Africa, and we have clients that use us to onboard hundreds of thousands, and in some cases even millions of consumers every month. We've been doing this for about 8 years, and we have solutions that can be used with either just someone's ID number or someone's face or someone's ID card or a combination of those three things. And so we've been able to optimize our solutions country by country to allow businesses to scale seamlessly and get the most return on their investment when they are spending money to acquire consumers. And they want to ensure that they're getting real consumers, good consumers, and avoiding fraud. We also spend a lot of time focusing on how to make sure that good users can get through the funnel, get through the journey, because we know that historically in our markets across Africa, that too often good users get rejected for reasons that are not real. And sometimes these are things like image quality, device type, internet connection, ID number or ID method of verification. And so we have tried to solve for many of those kinds of challenges to make it easy for developers and businesses to get consumers into their applications. So I've been doing this for about 8 years. I started the company after being an investor for roughly a decade. So before being a founder, I was an investor, which is kind of an unusual journey. Many people try to go the other direction. I guess I've always gone closer and closer to value creation. That's always been what's been interesting for me. So look forward to sharing more with the audience.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Mark. And Ayo, also, if you just tell us a bit about Kyshi and about yourself.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Mark, kudos to you. Love to see ex-investors as now operators, so they really know what it feels like. That could be a bit controversial, but hey, love to see
It's
it.
very humbling.
So, yeah, indeed. So awesome. All right, well, great. So my name is Ayo Akindele. I'm the founder and CEO of Kyshi. So just to give a little bit of background as to why I'm here, I think for two reasons. One is that I spent quite a bit of my career in a company that I would say scaled pretty massively, and being in such of a pivotal sort of part of that company, i.e., its sales and growth team. Um, I think provides me quite a bit of experience to speak on today. And I think the second thing is I now run a business that sort of actually helps businesses expand and to scale. And so we exist purely to help other businesses scale. So firstly, I spent nearly 14 years in a city in London for a company called Prequin, Prequin, an early stage company then, which provides alternative assets data to investment professionals in the private equity, hedge fund, real estate, VC sort of market. We started from a small little office in London in Blackfriars. And I think, in the 14 years that I was there, it was a company that eventually grew into a multi-billion-dollar company that went from one office in London to about 11 offices globally, 25 people to nearly 1,000 people. Now, of course, there was a kind of a method to that scale over time, and I'm happy to speak about some of those practical sort of experiences that I had. But thankfully, well, maybe good for them. A couple of months ago, they were acquired by BlackRock at nearly a $4 billion valuation. Maybe I wish I was still there. But hey, but I was, I'm really, really, really pleased to have contributed to that scale up. And I think what we're doing today, particularly for businesses, global businesses who want to come into Africa, but also African businesses who want to scale across the continent. We've done a lot of the dirty work, and I'll speak to that momentarily. But it's something that I think Africa needs to do more cross-border trade with the rest of the world. But we need to make it easy for that to happen because we're in a very sort of unique environment that has 54 unique markets. And I think providing an easy way for businesses that are either in one part of the continent to scale across the continent, or global businesses who want to come into Africa, where we'll be one of the biggest sort of markets in the world, is our mission today. So I'm happy to speak more on that as we discuss further. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an amazing context you set. And I would go back to Mark. When people say scaling a business in the context of Africa, it means different things to different people. So, Mark, coming back to you, what does scale mean in the context of Smile Identity? And what did you see where you feel like, okay, we are now at a stage where we now need to take these things to the next level?
Yeah, I think again, it depends on which lens you're viewing the company through. And yeah, scale is a word that gets thrown around a lot. What does it really mean? I guess in the context of startups, people think of the life cycle of a company. You're a startup for a while, and then your goal is to become not a startup. Your goal is to become a big company. But there's a part of that journey when you're not quite a big company and you're not quite a startup anymore. You're sort of a scale up. That's a new term that people have come up with. Typically, this is a company that is likely past their Series A, and they're trying to get either to Series B, or they're past their Series B and they're now kind of moving beyond that. So that's typically where the stage people think about is scale. And of course, the Series A, Series B construct is very much a venture capital nomenclature. So if you're building a company and you've bootstrapped it and these A letters, B letters don't make any sense, yeah, that's fine, doesn't matter. But really what that means is a company usually that's able to do millions of dollars of revenue and is now able to service a large portion of its market. And in theory, can continue to take more and more market share because you've got the ability to grow and to expand and to innovate. And that's sort of what, where I think about it, scale or scale up. For us as a company, it's meant different things at different times. From the very beginning, we always intended to be multinational. So the hard part of that was that I had to go figure out multiple markets kind of at the same time, because I needed to make sure whatever we were building would be applicable in more than just one market. And I would say, in hindsight, questionable whether I would have done the same thing the same way. I probably would have done things differently. But certainly at the time, I felt like we needed to be Pan-African to be relevant in the long term. We can debate the merits of that later in the call. But after being active now in 4, 5, 6 markets for a number of years, some markets we are at scale, and other markets we're not at scale, even though we've been there for 5 or 6 years. And so now we've gone through the process of saying, okay, what's the next market we need to take to scale? What's the next market we need to take to scale? And for us, that's obviously, it's the volume of transactions, or we call them jobs, in our system. And it's obviously the revenue as well. And underpinning that is the people, the processes, the products and features that you've got to have to be relevant in let's say your core market, but in theory then relevant for the next tier of customers or the next tier of markets. So that's how we think about it at Smile ID. And I would say the timing of it really was like, there's been different stages in the journey, but there was sort of a time to get to the next scale was like after we'd already gotten to our Series A, and we'd crossed $1.5 million. We were almost at $2 million run rate. And the answer was, now, how do we sort of go back and fix a bunch of things that we sort of built the quick and dirty way, but needed to be done better in order to handle the kinds of demands that were coming with the level of customers that we acquired. So that was the first sort of stage of that. But now there's different stages.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. I would stay with you a little bit because a lot of people tend to approach the new market expansion later, and you've taken a slightly different approach. So I want you to just speak more about it from different dimensions of scale, not just from a market standpoint now. There's the part where you can think about like product expansion. Do you stay in one market and try to do like multi-product, or max out and go to different categories? Maybe you were selling to startups, then you start selling to like enterprise. Or in some cases, some people would say, okay, it's not a product approach, it's a composition of team approach. We have to, there are some companies that can be considered scale up, but they are still in single markets in Africa today.
Yeah.
So just dig deep again into like that thought process.
Great companies are like that, by the way. I would say some of the best companies in Africa are actually still primarily in one market.
Exactly.
Yeah. The problem with my answer to this is that, I don't think that I would advise companies to copy what we just did. And B, the reason why is because I think we made a bunch of mistakes by trying to do too many things at once. So, sort of the answer is, and then 3 is we got a little bit lucky because even though we tried to do too many things at once, and even though we made a number of mistakes in doing that, we were able to continue raising money. They gave us more time. And that was a function of a 0 interest rate environment where, there was a lot more venture capital floating around. And B, the fact that I'd spent 10 years in the industry, I knew how to raise money. So, I could tell the story, and the story, people wanted to hear the story. So it gave us more time to raise more money, to be able to continue to make, experiments and try things. And eventually we tried enough things that enough things worked, that we were able to succeed. But I think it'd be dangerous as an entrepreneur to try to repeat what we did at this current stage in I guess the macroeconomic cycle. So, if I was doing this company again today, I probably, and maybe there's analogous companies, if I was doing something in payments today, if I was doing something in I don't know, compliance infrastructure today, I might have started with, or might start with one market and try to really get to dominance in that market. But there are some businesses, especially cross-border businesses like Ayo's business, that lend themselves to being international from day one. And so you're figuring out a different niche. You're going very broad from day one, like we were, but you might have a very specific and targeted ideal customer who is okay with something that is like only has a couple features, but it really nails it on those features that are relevant for international businesses. And so, it just really depends whether to approach things like we did or whether to approach things like I would do today. Depends a lot on the nature of the business that you're trying to build.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for that, Mark. And I'll come back to you, Ayo. You've seen.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, go on. I just had some network issues, but I'm back. So I don't know if I missed something. Go ahead.
Oh, I see. Yeah, don't worry. I think it's good. We can hear you clearly now. Yeah. So I was just coming back to you actually to say that you actually help businesses scale, like you help them expand into new markets. And I don't know if you heard most of what Mark had said. The question to you is the businesses that have been able to do it successfully. What are some of the things that you think they've sort of like figured out or they've been able to do very well? And the ones that have struggled, what are some things that you think might be the reason based on your experience working with different companies that are trying to expand across markets?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think, in the context that, we're sort of speaking about, which are startups. So I think scaling can mean a number of things based on the type of company that you are. But, in the context of startups, I would define it as, expanding your business, right? So this could mean you're expanding into other customer segments. It could be in more states, more countries, more continents. But I think it needs to be a bit intentional and strategic. So Mark, mentioned, that there are quite a number of a lot of companies in Africa, but how many companies in Africa have actually done it successfully? I think it can get easier to do it these days, but I think if you are a startup and maybe tech enabled, there are ways that you can do that a bit easier today. But I think, again, it comes down to, how you built your product, how you built your operations, your processes, and whether it's something that can easily be duplicated in other markets. So, a prerequisite in our world of startups is, what kind of high sort of level of efficiencies have you created in your operations, in your business model, or your technology that enables you to just increase your productivity exponentially without having to make significant changes or, put on much additional cost. So I like to sort of learn by examples and, by case studies. So just let me give you two. One is, again, practically where I spent a lot of my time. So Preqin, going back to Preqin where I worked, leading research data company. We're in London, focused on UK customers, UK PE, VC platforms. But in doing that, in learning and researching, using state-of-the-art technology to update the information that we gathered on players in the market. That took us to gathering data on other markets. So we were able to apply those same methods that we were using to research data. And it was very optimized so that it didn't matter whether we were collecting data for, for activities going on in North America or in Asia or LATAM. It was something that we could therefore easily sell or distribute to customers in other markets. So when we started selling to customers in the US or in Asia from the UK, it was easier. That transition was easier for us to just all of a sudden start selling beyond UK and in Europe. And this was well before we decided to then invest into setting up offices and research teams that are a bit more localized and a bit closer to the people that we were trying to interact with. So Again, that doesn't just happen overnight, of course. It did take us probably every few years or so to kind of intentionally invest in, really, really enter a new market. But I think, one thing that we did obviously very well was, what do we do very well as a company? All the, excellent sort of research methods and data collections that we needed was the same that we applied in London, in Europe, that we applied in other markets. And so it was easy for us to, I guess, scale in that way. Another example, case study that I would use is one that I think will be more familiar to us, which is a company called Waka Now, you know, travel and leisure online platform. Nigerian headquartered. They've been in Nigeria, I think, probably up to 10 years now, if not more. And for a long time, it seemed like, well, you could go to Waka Now as a Nigerian and just buy flights and, book hotels and so on. But I mean, we've seen over time now that, without having to be physically present in a number of other African countries, and just by the same way that it can, work with airlines and or other sort of travel agents and see all the best deals and provide all the best deals, it can do that for other markets in Africa, other customer markets. And so it's obviously leveraged the best sort of payment technologies and similar type of partnership structures that it did, with airlines or travel businesses from Nigeria, that it's adopted in other places. So, it can expand to all 54 countries in Africa, should it wish to, based on, well, what's the customer base in those countries. So I think expanding or scaling up doesn't then become something that needs to be built from ground up each time. So I think that's how I would see, scaling up, expanding your market, and, building just those very good operational efficiencies, and then adopting whatever sort of latest technologies that allows you to move beyond that single market, and scaling it to acquire a lot more customers in other places.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks a lot for that, Ayo. But I also, you know, I like the examples you gave, but I also don't think that we have a lot of successful examples of companies that have been able to do it well. And this applies to even traditional companies.
Absolutely.
Even for the traditional banks, where you would say they operate in 14 countries, 20 countries, what you find out is that maybe 90% of the revenue is still coming from the major market. So can you truly say that they have? So I think my question really is, what is unique about Africa? And this is to both of you, that makes scaling to multiple markets in terms of having real business in different markets
Yeah.
seemingly more difficult than in other regions, in Europe. I mean, it's hard globally, but it seems to
Yeah.
be particularly difficult in Africa. What are some specific challenges? Just, calling them out to say, like, these are the issues, so that everyone, that is on the call, that is thinking about their next market and all of those things, that, they're just aware that these are the things I have to think about, I have to deal with. So maybe Mark wants to go first.
Sure, I'm
Mark,
happy
go
to
for it.
talk about this. I've spent years of my life and blood, sweat, and tears and taxes on learning these lessons the most painful way possible. There's some great questions here on the side channel, so I'm gonna try to weave some of these into my answer. What makes it challenging? Why is Africa uniquely challenging to scale across borders, as opposed to, let's say, in the United States or North America or Europe? Well, first of all, most people try to make these comparisons. A lot of people try to make these comparisons to the United States, and the reality is the United States and even North America is largely one market. So, like, when you go from California to New York or to Texas, like, very little changes. Maybe the culture changes a little bit, the food changes a little bit, but from a market standpoint, a legal standpoint, compliance standpoint, it's basically all the same market. With the exception of a few highly regulated industries like payments. Europe, yeah, it's different countries, but remember the European Union has spent 50 years building a single economic market. And so things like the CE mark, that is like standards for certifications, and all of in a single currency, these things are now solved problems. So if you want to launch a business in France and then you want to expand to Germany and, the Netherlands, whatever, you change the language, you probably change some of the marketing tactics, but the product and the way that people pay doesn't really have to change. You get to Africa, those aren't true. The way people pay definitely is different country to country. And the methods for solving that are still being built right now. Like there are companies trying to build that right now. The products itself often have to change depending on what you're delivering. If you're delivering physical goods, the distribution methods, the logistics, all that's going to be different country to country, and you have to be physically present. If you're delivering digital goods and you're fortunate enough to be a technology entrepreneur, maybe you don't have to do much on the ground, like the Waka Now example. Maybe you don't need an office or anybody employed in that country, but you might need local integrations. You might need changes in the products so that they're relevant given the context in that country. So people maybe they fly with certain kinds of flights in one jurisdiction, and so the types of airline flights and the types of airlines you're going to be booking in maybe East Africa or Southern Africa are quite different than if they're in North Africa or West Africa. So those things can vary a lot. And then of course language, but language is almost an afterthought. It's just like, oh yeah, of course language is different, but the really hard things is how people pay for products, how people get access to products, and then the products themselves, how similar or different they need to be country to country. And we have spent an enormous amount of time with our engineering just to try to make the APIs that we build to be relatively consistent. So if a developer from Nigeria integrates us, they don't have to change their code base dramatically, when they want to now launch in Kenya or in South Africa or in Uganda. But they still have to make some changes because even though we've simplified it greatly, there are still some minor changes country to country that we can't avoid. So those are some of the challenges, I think, scaling across Africa. And I think to the question here about do you need people on the ground? Do you need jurisdictions, like legal entities set up? I mean, eventually you may, but the people make the mistake, like I made the mistake of thinking that, oh, if I just incorporate in all these countries and I just get integrated into each of the relevant data sources for each of these countries, like if I build it, they will come. And the answer is, I built it for 6 countries, and then I was losing money in 5 of them for 3 years.
You have to maintain what you've built in those countries.
And the question is always every year, do we keep this in or we shut it down? Do we keep it and you shut it down? And then you look at the shutdown costs, and they're like as high as keeping it open for another year. And so every year you're like, let's just wait another year. Maybe it'll happen this year. So in the end, we ended up winding up some entities, keeping others, figuring out how to get the costs as low as possible. But I would not think about incorporation as the first step in launching a new market. I would almost think about it as almost the last step, because what you want to find out first is what's the size of the market? Can what you've already built that's working in one market, let's say ideally you've figured out a market that you know really well. Maybe it's your home market, maybe it's an industry that you know really well. So you've figured out something that's working. Fantastic. Most entrepreneurs never get there. Congratulations. Now you want to scale it. Don't forget everything you just learned. You figured out how to figure out a market. Take the time before you launch or incorporate or hire people to go and understand that new market. And that might mean desktop research. It might mean going to another country and living there for a month and talking with everyone in your industry before you decide whether or not you're actually going to do this and spend time and money in the next 3 years of your life paying taxes in that new country. So I think it's almost the last step once you've kind of figured out that you actually want to do this new country or new market.
And don't do all of that. Just come to Kyshi, right? To test out,
Well, that's the. I mean, maybe just as a plug to Ayo's company and to some of the others, us also Smile IDs in this space. Now, there's a number of us who spent the last 5 years trying to figure out how to make it easy for companies to scale. And so there are some of these components, like payments, like ID verification, even incorporation, that are beginning to get solved by other companies. So
Yeah.
hopefully in the next 6 months, year, 18 months, as you're thinking about doing this, like we've got some of those bases covered for you, but your core business, you're still going to have to figure out for that new market.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, no. That's very useful. On the challenges side, do you have anything to add, Ayo?
Yeah. So Mark has almost said it all and stolen all my thunder. But I think, look, we really wish that Africa was not 54 distinct set of markets, right? Like he sort of mentioned again, the EU, you pretty much have all of Europe. You got UK and the EU, and then you got the Americas, and then you got Africa with 54 unique markets. Um, its own unique sort of tax import regimes, its own, over 54 official currencies, only second behind Asia. It's so difficult to kind of just expand, right? Um, and that's why, as again Mark said, understanding that yes, there's 1 point something billion people. You can't um, just again export the same thing you built in one country to another country without understanding well enough, like a lot of the nuances to those countries, and maybe a good way to sort of just test that out or figure that out initially might be to just look at the most cost effective ways to sort of learn
Yeah,
without having to get these very expensive these days incorporations in all these different countries. It is super expensive. In some countries, you have to invest as much as $500,000 or $1 million just to incorporate, which is a nightmare, and it just makes it almost impossible for a lot of businesses to expand. In the EU, if you're in France, you can just passport to Germany, and several other countries. So it's yeah, I mean, I think those are the biggest challenges now,
yeah,
and I think where we exist purely to kind of help solve that problem, so that if you're again a US company, you need to tap into this burgeoning Africa consumer market. You can come to someone like us, or if you are a South African business and you want to sell to Nigerian businesses, well, you don't need to worry about setting up. Again, come to someone like us. So I think there are innovations these days that as Mark said, that helps you sort out payments, setup, and a number of other things conforming to regulations and the rest of it, because there is a lot to kind of to learn. But yeah, I think that's what I
so
was
I
at.
think my last question before we move to something else on this topic is, why not, if it's this difficult, why not just go global, right? And we're beginning to see some companies think in that direction. Like if I figure out what I'm trying to do in Nigeria and it's so difficult to expand to Kenya, and I can maybe just go to, I don't know, the US or go to Europe, because it's almost as difficult anyway. Why aren't we seeing more businesses think in that direction? Just go like from Africa straight to the world, Africa to the world.
Yeah. I think I'll add two comments on that. I mean, one, I think it's a fair question. It's a good question to ask yourself if you're an entrepreneur. I've met a number of entrepreneurs from Nigeria who've asked that same question, and they've answered it in the affirmative. They've said they've gone global. The caution is that if you think competition is intense in Africa, wait till you get to the United States or Europe. But there's a caveat there. If you go to a market, or if you're serving a market that you understand better than those companies from the US or Europe, then you may be able to build something that is global, even though you're doing it in a market that is the US or Europe. And the examples that I've seen that have been very successful are remittances companies. So you've got a number of these African founded African remittance companies that started in Africa, or the founders are from Africa, but their core markets now are either Canada or the US. And it's because they've targeted migrant communities in Canada or the US. They understand those communities extremely well, better than Americans would, better than Canadians would. And they've taken advantage of the fact that you've got strong currencies in those markets. You've got sort of a very large and relatively level playing field. So they can operate there very effectively and quickly, but they do a better job of serving their customer than existing banks or US companies or European companies would. So that's been a really clever and interesting opportunity. And I think there's probably other opportunities like that. Could be in media, entertainment, fashion, travel. So I think that's an interesting space. I keep waiting for like the African fashion companies to I really want to see this because I think there's so much cool work and design and things that are produced in Africa that are really unique, but you just don't see them on the global marketplace that often. But I think that's going to be an interesting opportunity.
Yeah, interesting take. Thanks a lot for that, Mark. Coming back to you, Ayo, the core of your business, you help businesses expand into new markets, and then let's talk about regulation, which is some of the things that we've alluded to. How are you navigating the different regulatory environment? The complexity of taxes, all the things that you're now telling the startups not to have to figure out themselves. You're trying to help them figure it out, but there are still things that they still need to be aware of. So just walk us through, that process and how you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on, the kind of business that you run, right? If you are, let's say you're a payments company, and you want to serve customers in certain markets, unfortunately, you kind of have to be regulated and licensed in each of those countries. And that's a painstaking process each time. There's almost no going around that these days, except you're going rogue, and that's typically not a good way to go in financial services or in payments. If you are a healthcare business, you probably have to do the same. Sadly, if you're pharmaceuticals, you kind of have to do the same. I think other areas in adhering to regulations, like for example taxes. I think those can be solved for today. Again, it's the sort of thing again that we help with. Regulations, of course, it's case by case, business by business. If you are, let's say, a Nigerian business and you are now selling to customers in South Africa or Ghana or wherever, and you need to ensure that you are compliant with tax laws in those countries, ensuring that customers are paying taxes, whatever sort of taxes, VATs, and other sort of local taxes, which can be again unique in the different African markets. It is going to be a wise thing to come to those who understand it, because it can be a significant burden on your whoever does that within your organization, whether those are accountants or lawyers, to ensuring that that is being that you are adhering to to regulations in every single market. So super important that again, as you look at scaling up, what do you need to ensure that you are covering regulatory wise. Again, if you're in a highly regulated industry as a business, then of course you need to get appropriate advice in each of the markets. That's a slow, I'd say, way to scale in. But if you are in an area that it's again regulations around taxes that you need to be mindful of, there are solutions out there. Again, whether it's a company that helps you to serve customers in various countries and they take care of all the taxes. Again, that is something that we do for every one of our customers, ensuring that taxes are paid when due. Just don't have to worry about that. Worry about providing your products, your service, shipping your services to the customers on time. Yeah, so I think that's how I would look at it. You need to be regulated, get your appropriate licenses. If you don't need to, and it's a case of tax regulations and so on, there are solutions out there.
Yeah. Slightly related.
Can I just tag on to that? Because I was going to say, I was actually spending a little time looking at Kyshi's website today, and this is actually a really good opportunity. I think I think if there, I mean, there are some, there's not that many of these companies, but there's a few of us. And I saw somebody mention in here Paystack. I was inspired by Paystack and Flutterwave. Like I saw what they did and how they were making it easier for people to, for merchants across Africa, and that was kind of my inspiration for Smile ID. I think hopefully, Kyshi is an inspiration for somebody else. There's opportunities like whether it's managing payroll, managing taxes, managing compliance, managing like data sovereignty or data hosting if that's required. I saw that Okra just moved into the cloud hosting space. Like if you can solve these problems, like this is really like language. We've got all these French conversations now. I have to make sure I got French speakers on the phone when we're doing sales calls in Francophone Africa. So like these are actually opportunities for the right entrepreneur or entrepreneurs. But yeah, if you're selling widgets, it's hard to sell widgets in 54 countries. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And the other part I was going to add to that for you, Mark, is also I know a lot of companies have also leveraged partnerships where they've been able to scale into a market without necessarily like getting the license, or because even for us at Anchor, I was telling Ayo before we went live that some of the markets we're considering, is first about having the right partners in those markets first before we even expand into those markets. So in your own case where, your business depends on some having access to some database in some market, how have you been able to leverage partnership as a scaling tool?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. We sort of started from the approach of we have to have direct connections into every government database, and we can't have any partners, and we have to do it all ourselves. And then we learned that is not always the best way, and we still have that in some cases, but in other cases we partner, and like we're really good partners now. We have a number of partners we help them make money. They help us make money. We've gotten much better at it now. We have sort of a methodology to it. We even have a team that does it. And that's certainly been something we've learned how to do in order to waste less time, waste less money.
Yeah. And let's talk
which is
about
an example of scaling up, right? So you've scaled up your partnership process, right?
exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about people and processes also a little bit to support the current stage of the business, the scale of the business where it is right now, and also for you, Ayo, where you're having to set up entities in different countries and have maybe even if it's just one person, but at least representatives in those countries. So how has your teams evolved over time, where you're now having to consider having people in different places? How do you ensure you maintain the culture of the company, that your processes don't break? What are some things you've put in place?
Sure.
Do you want to go first, and then I'll say my comments?
Yeah, okay. So I think it really does come down to culture. You mentioned it. Again, I'm a big advocate of that. I think consistent HR and product development principles across your business is super important. Again, I'm lucky to have learned from, I think, one of the best, a Preqin where I worked. From being a 25-person team in a tiny office in London to having 11 offices globally of over 1,000 employees, and traveling to every single one of those offices, no matter whether it was London or Hong Kong office or New York office or San Francisco, it's all the same cultures and principles, right? In the way that your customer centric sort of product or service, or the way you develop your people. So those are very, very important things to me in any case. Over the years, we've had people mainly across London and Africa. So London, and then Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, at one point Zimbabwe. I think, and we started in the COVID era, just to even make things worse. And where we're not in our physical kind of space together, but in this sort of virtual world. And of course, it makes that even, I think, doubly difficult. But I think the way people have to communicate, the way you pay attention to whatever it is, your mission, and ensuring that I literally, unless, I mean, it's probably not something you can do forever, but I literally am on stand up every single day, though it's a 5 to 15 minute meeting, but just sort of listening. I'm not sharing it, but I'm just listening, and observing the way people share, the way people communicate, the way we try to understand, focus on customer problems and how we're going to solve those problems, and how, again, we share each other's pains and problems with each other. So I think that's what I certainly practice. It's something that I experience. I thought it was the best way to have scaled where we worked before, and it's certainly something that I've seen from some of the biggest companies today. Again, I look at people like Amazon and what Bezos has done over time. And I think as they kind of scale into different product categories and being leaders in those categories, and I think it's really comes down to being very customer centric, being very people centric, and ensuring that you maintain that culture, no matter where your teams are. So yeah, that's sort of my 2 cents on that.
I agree with everything Ayo said. And in fact, we had a very similar timing, very similar situation where we grew up during COVID. So we were forced into this sort of hyper distributed world, even for the people who are living in the same city. And I didn't like it. I would prefer that we were in person in a single office, but also the nature of our business forced us to have to people in many different countries because we were trying to help companies figure out how to scale in all those countries. So I'll add a slightly different topic to this or lens to this. So building on what Ayo said about the Bezos comment. So in Amazon, they have this concept of like bar raisers. And the idea is that when you start hiring, you have somebody on the hiring committee whose job is to make sure that when they come in at the end and they basically say, is this person that you're about to add to the team, do I believe objectively that they are better than the average of this team? Meaning that every person that you're hiring, are they going to make the team a better team objectively? And if the answer is not yes, don't make the hire. Because otherwise you're either strengthening your team or you're diluting it, like as you go from 5 people to 10 people to 20 people to 25. And you wanted to try to see how far you can keep making the team better and better, as opposed to sort of making it bigger and weaker, or bigger and slower, because that's what happens. By the way, we went through the same problem. We had sort of had to learn this the hard way. But what I would say is that what changed about us, and this is very common, I heard Paystack went through this, many companies have gone through this. Andela's gone through this, Flutterwave's gone through this, I'm sure the big banks went through this, is in the early days, you hire people who are entrepreneurial. They're a mixture of pirates and romantics. They're there because they love startups. They love to do everything. They love the sort of entrepreneurial freedom that comes with building companies in the early stages. And that means they're willing to kind of do things that are crazy, like work till 2 a.m. and like go do a customer meeting, even though they don't know anything about sales, and then go like work on marketing, even though they've never done marketing before. Like they're just willing to try anything and do everything. And that's great. You need people like that. And then you get to 25 employees and you start hiring the first person who has like a family, or like they have kids, or they have commitments on the weekends. They're a coach or something. And like asking them to just stay up until 2 a.m. randomly on a Wednesday because you didn't do good planning is not a good use of their talents and their time. And you can't hold on to good people, and you end up going back to the people who aren't specialists. What you really need to do is start building processes such that people don't have crazy days or crazy weeks every single day, every single week. And that is hard because it means the founders have to start learning how to create focus, roles, and responsibilities. Like, no, your job is to own this metric, not these other 15 things, just this metric, right? And your job is not to go get involved in other people's stuff. Your job is to own this metric and get this thing nailed down. And so if you start giving people very clear roles and responsibilities, one of my mistakes was I would think something was so important, I would just talk about it in every meeting. I'd end the week and 3 different teams are now working on that thing, which in my sort of first time entrepreneur thing, I was like, oh, well, great. Like one of the teams will figure it out. Well, actually what happens is nobody owns it because now everybody thinks everybody else owns it. And so you get a diluted quality. Nobody, then finally a founder has to step in and like do it. So you have like, so basically you do fewer things because nobody can actually focus. So the challenge is you need to keep leveling up the team, and then you need to keep making the roles and responsibilities more clear. So less jack of all trades, more specialists. And then the hard part of that is some people can't make the transition. And sometimes those people are your friends, and you've worked with them in the trenches, and you care about them, and they have kids and they have families, and you got to have the hard conversation. And that's part of being a founder.
Have you had to have any of such conversation, and how did you navigate it?
Yeah, I've had to have 10 of these conversations. Like,
and do you have any tips of how to navigate, like, someone is not scaling at this, at the scale of the company, and you have to have those difficult conversations?
I'll say one last thing, and then I don't want to monopolize the whole talk, so we can open it up for questions or do whatever you want to do. But I think the thing to keep in mind is when someone is not succeeding at their job or in the role that they're now been placed in, especially if they've been successful in the past, but they're not succeeding in this new role.
Yeah.
They're not a bad person, and you're not a bad boss for letting them go. In fact, if you keep trying to make them fit into a role in which they're not successful, you're actually doing a disservice to them, because what it means is they're not going to be set up for success in the role, and their learning now has stopped or slowed down. And what happens is they start getting frustrated because they kind of know that they're not being successful. And it's okay if this goes on for a few weeks or months. They try to make the transition. You see, maybe it's possible. Like, maybe people can sometimes adapt. So you can't just let go of people right away. You got to give them a shot. But if it's clear that they're not succeeding, like, you should have that conversation, and they should know also that they're not succeeding. And the best thing you can do is try to take care of them. Give them a good severance package. Give them a letter of recommendation if you feel confident that you can. Here's the things this person's good at. Because in the next role, like, they may not be right for this role or for this stage of the company, but there's probably another company out there where they are perfect and they're great for that role or that stage of company. So the best thing is that they can go find that next opportunity.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Ayo is still with us. Ayo, I think you might be having some network issues. So while we're waiting for Ayo to join, I just wanted you to talk a bit about fundraising for scale as well, because you've been an investor, and like you alluded to earlier in the call, you've been successful at fundraising. You did a Series B last year. You've done at least 3 or 4 rounds of fundraising for Smile already. Do you have some tips? Are there things that you think investors want to see to be able to justify that the company has what it takes to actually scale? Because of course, it's very important when you want to fundraise to be able to demonstrate that the business can scale. So what are some things that you would advise founders to pay attention to?
Well, hopefully if they're on this call and they're talking about scaling up, they've already been able to raise some money. But we're just talking about fundraising. In the early days, fundraising is about the founders and the story.
Yep.
Not about the metrics. It's usually about the founders and the story. Metrics are nice if you have them. When you get to the scale up stage, it's about the team that you've put in place, and it's about the metrics. And if you don't have good metrics, you need to talk to investors to find out what good metrics are. And then, like, until you have them, you're going to struggle to raise money. So figure out what the metrics are that you need by talking to investors, and then focus on those metrics and the team, the quality of the team. And ideally, you have such a high quality team that when you put their names and their sort of backgrounds on a page, that story tells itself without you having to open your mouth.
Yeah.
So that, and when it does get time to investor calls, you could let those people from your team be on a call with an investor, and it's going to go well without you being on the call. Yeah. You have to get to that stage before you're like, let's go spend 6 months trying to raise a Series B.
Yeah, and I thought I was definitely going to be coming onto this call to, share many tips on how not to scale, right? Because there's certainly a lot of like lessons that I've learned on that. you know, so many things that we've done wrongly. We'll try to correct stuff, and hopefully those things work well long term. But just some of the things that Mark just touched on there, having the right team. Now,
Mm.
it's not, again, advice I give to any kind of entrepreneur founder these days is, you know, almost don't try and go it alone. A startup, being an entrepreneur these days is super, super, super difficult. Building something that you would like to be a scaled up business that I think every founder aspires to building a unicorn can hardly be done by yourself. And I think rightfully, as I've sort of learned over time, why investors only want to invest into co-founder teams is, justifiably correct. Unless you are a serial entrepreneur that they can trust, knows how to build the right team of people. So, because when you're thinking about, building a startup that should hopefully become, a multi-billion dollar company one day, you've got to think about, all the elements of that business that needs to that you can grow that product or service to be able to serve tons of businesses or customers globally. And whether that is ensuring that you have the right technical co-founder who has experience of building scalable tech, right? Not just how you can build something that my mom can use, but something that my mom and maybe my sister can
Mhm.
use, even though they're two different generations. Or my mom who's Black African, or someone who's white male in the United States, ensuring that there are people who have that background, that experience. So yeah, I think ensuring you have the right team in place, and then if you're building a product that that someone in that you would like to see someone in Nigeria use versus someone in Cote d'Ivoire, though again different markets, anglophone, francophone, is having that understanding. Okay, well, what is common across those markets, and so what is the potential for this product to scale from it being used by someone in Lagos versus someone in Abidjan? Having that sort of product experience and that background, again, maybe that comes from having the right team member in place. So yeah, I think, as Mark says, very true, and you obviously know this a lot because from your VC background, is yeah, around the team and that story first. Then later on, as you sort of want to scale up, is have you build out the product or your operations in the way that with that sort of Series A cash then takes you to rocket growth. And yeah, I think it's it's a pitfall, or a couple of pitfalls that so many founders have seen over time, that I think as we learn more and hopefully have more of these discussions, we can share, and that look, this is the way to scale, but hey, this is also the way to not scale.
Yeah.
And I can definitely preach that gospel all day long.
Yeah. And that's why we need more successful example of companies that have been able to scale, because that talent pool, that experience is relevant for all of us to learn. Like, okay, these are the things that some of these companies tried that didn't work. These are the things that worked. And these are like some best practices. And sometimes you just literally need to bring someone that has done it before. Like, you don't even want to preempt or start, experimenting too much. You're like, okay, we have enough talent in the continent that have scaled companies across different layers, scaled products, scaled within markets, multiple regions, across segments. But I guess it also comes with the maturity of the ecosystem. So maybe with time, as more companies like both of you and Anchor as well, as we all grow, we continue to feed and we see the cycle in the ecosystem. I'm mindful of time, so we can only take one last question for both of you. And that question would be, what are the next steps for your company specifically? And if you're going to leave the operators and founders that are listening today with one final advice about how to scale or how not to scale, what would that be? But before you say that, just give maybe like high level, what are the next plans for your specific businesses?
Sure. Let me speak first because I got to jump on another call. But for us, our focus is really now around building out authentication. So we've done a lot in the onboarding world. We've onboarded over 150 million Africans into financial services apps of all kinds, into ride-sharing apps, into education, solar, lantern, cell phone finance, all kinds of things. We've been a part of onboarding people into. But now there's lots of people who have accounts. Some of those accounts have substantial value in them. And in the world of AI and generative AI, we are seeing all kinds of interesting attempts to steal your identity or pretend to be you or to take over your account. And so we've built, and we spent this year building an entire new computer vision stack to catch deep fakes, to catch fraud. And we're very actively selling and doing authentication at scale. So we're now doing nearly something like 4 to 5 million authentication events a month right now. And so this is face recognition to as a second factor form of authentication before somebody sends a large transaction or cashes out a large amount of money or resets their PIN or password. So we're now providing authentication as well as onboarding. We're really building out that capability, and we just got a new product in that space that we're launching very soon. Maybe my sort of last comment to entrepreneurs as a word of advice, which is, obviously being an entrepreneur, you're often thinking about taking risk. You're spending a lot of time like on the edge of any market or segment. You're doing things that other people wouldn't do because there's something a little bit different about you as an entrepreneur. This is true of early stage employees too, not just founders. Like early stage employees are also willing to take a little bit more risk. I think like as you think about scale up as opposed to start up, start focusing on, ask yourself, what are the things we do really well? Like, what are the things that we're actually better at than anybody else? And then set that as a high bar for yourself and say, look, I don't want to go do something else like in a new market or with a new hire or a new team unless I think I can do it like close to as well as I'm doing this core thing right now. And so use that as a bar in hiring or market expansion and hold yourself to an increasingly higher standard of quality as you keep scaling up the company, as opposed to sort of letting things slip or dilute as you try to go to the next market or the next hire or the next VP of whatever role you're hiring.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Mark. And Ayo, let's come to you very quickly.
Yeah,
Thanks,
sure.
thanks everyone.
Yeah, see you, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
So my advice would be, get things right from the start. I think there's a tendency these days for folks to just very quickly rush, build an MVP. The right approach is still build an MVP, right? But as you build an MVP and how you grow that, it's really important to, well, first of all, even before you get that MVP out, how well do you understand the problem you're trying to solve at a very sort of very, very sort of granular level? How well have you researched, your customers? How well do you understand their pains? Again, I'm talking from experience of what I've seen done right, being in those environments, but what we've done wrong and sort of gotten better at, and how I know that can just sort of slow you down. So the best sort of ways is, just really taking your time to understand as well as you can the pain points of your target customer. And again, if you are going to be a business that you would like to see scaled up, well, how many people does it really affect? Or is it just, your mom and your sister? Because if it's just the people in your village that this thing is going to solve for, then you're never going to be a scale up. You may be a champion in your village, but it's not going to make you it's not going to put you on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. So I think the advice that I will give to myself, even going years back, but to every sort of new entrepreneur today, is get it right from the start. Take your time to really, really understand your customers, and build your MVP on that, and then refine, iterate, get feedback, iterate, feedback, and then sort of scale long term. Once you've understood, as we've learned, once you've got into that product market fit, and then you're ready for a scale up. Unfortunately, most businesses just never get to that point because
Mm.
you think you understand the problem, and you can maybe tell a good story and get that initial sort of pre-seed and maybe even seed capital. And after you've raised, in recent times, even a good cool few $1 million, you still just have burnt that
Yeah.
to a lot of waste, and still haven't figured out all the sort of best efficient ways to maybe build out your technology or build out your marketing or sales or whatever it is, and therefore you can't ever get those metrics, as Marcus said, to get the right amount of money to then scale up. So it's all about those early beginnings,
Yeah.
and really really understanding the customers and building your product, and making sure it's a product that you can sell to a large customer base. And I think getting it right from the team, from the product, is super super important. That would be my final sort of advice.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ayo, and thanks to Mark as well. I think the way to sum it up is just to say, don't scale what is not working. Figure out what is working, what you're good at, and then that's what you scale.
It's good to be it's okay to be a mom and pop business.
Exactly.
And
Until you figure it out before you scale.
until you figure it out. And yes,
Makes
you make
sense.
sure you are that sort of venture backable, scalable company before you
Yeah.
start. Otherwise, you'll just be kicking yourself, thinking, why are not millions of customers coming to use my product? It's the best thing since sliced bread. But no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's a cookie. So yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I wish we can continue, but we like to keep this to the time. So we like to keep it to just 1 hour. Thank you so much, Ayo, and thanks a lot to Mark
My
that he
pleasure.
had to give up because he has another call. It's been such a pleasure to have you, and thanks for all the insights that you've shared.
Absolutely.
Just before we wrap up, just to remind everyone that for companies that are listening, Anchor is here to support you with your payment infrastructure, compliance, the APIs you need to move um, funds to launch, build, and also scale your financial products. So, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you've gotten some insights and some practical nuggets from Ayo and from Mark. Thank you for your time. We appreciate, and we would see you on the next edition of our webinar.
Thank you again, Segun. And yeah, it's
Thanks.
been excellent working with your team over the last few months. We're looking forward to helping a lot more businesses scale across Africa. So yeah, here to help. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
day.
Ayo. Everyone. Cheers, guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.